I used to always say, as a prosecutor, that, the first and basic right, the reason why people enter the social compact is because they want to be able to live in peace and not have someone come along and, kill them or take them stuff. And the George Soros-backed prosecutors have essentially said, well, you can take people's stuff if it's their house or if it's under, $1,000 or $2,000. And what that has done is not only undermined our values, but it's created this a danger in our community where you're starting to see more property crimes. And eventually, if you read if you're believing the James Q. Wilson broken windows theory, those little crimes, those property crimes, ultimately will become bigger and bigger crimes that will result in people dying.
Democrats have a major problem when it comes to law and order, crime in America, and it is a problem that is going to haunt them at the ballot box, I predict. And it is the reason why so many Americans that are independents, why also people within the Hispanic community, within Black communities, have seen a shift. I don't believe this is all about economics, although I believe that's a major player. But I do believe that the failed Democratic Party to keep law and order is the reason why we're going to see such a big shift towards Republicans in November. That is going to be a major, major issue. And that's the reason why the border is a major issue. Here's one thing that conservatives can say that radical leftists can't. Your security matters. Your family matters. Your life matters. You should be able to go out and go for a run around your college campus without having to fear that somebody could jump from the shadows and target you and assault you or kill you. You should be able to go shopping and not have to worry in California, for example, whether or not you locked the doors on your car, because you don't want to lock them there. Remember, I talked about this when I was in Oakland, when I was in San Francisco, when I was traveling through LA. You want to leave your car unlocked. You want to leave your windows down. So that way, if there's something in there for the thief to steal, at least they won't break the windows on your vehicle. You want to be able to be secure in the fact, as best you can be, that your children will be safe, that they will not be offered a pill that is laced with fentanyl or pure fentanyl, that they will have a future. These are all things that we can fix. These are all things that the Democratic Party has ensured that are going wrong in our country. This is the chaos that is dividing us. This is the chaos that is making our lives impossible. It is the reason why so many people in this country right now feel as though the government is putting them last. 8 to 10 million illegal aliens inside our nation, squatting in our homes, committing crimes, most of them single-aged, military-aged males. How is that even okay? How is that even okay? I have somebody very special on the show today. We've had him here before. Somebody who can explain to you in layman's terms what is happening in our country, how we get it back. Why are we facing right now the possibility that we are, and many of us already believe this, that we're living in a banana republic? But how do we get back to our basic principles? How do we get back to a rule of law and justice? I have former Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich on the show today, and we're going to dive right into that, a complete breakdown of law and order in America. We're going to take that apart. We're going to put it back together again, and we are going to give you the tools for you and your family to have a better and brighter future, and one for our nation as well. But first, let's talk about Goldco. Are you concerned about the endless flood of illegal immigration at the southern border? How about the $1 trillion being added to the national debt every 100 days? It's no wonder thousands of hardworking, patriotic Americans, including myself, are learning how to protect and diversify their retirement savings with precious metals. That's why I've partnered with the top-rated company, Goldco. Right now, you can get a free 2024 wealth protection kit and learn how to possibly get $10,000 in bonus silver as a listener of the show while supplies last. Protect your family's financial future and freedom. Get started today at Sara, SARA, likesgold.com or call 855-823-GOLD GOLD. Get your free gold kit at Goldco and learn how to get $10,000 in bonus silver. Sara, SARA, likesgold.com or 855-823-4653. That's Sara, likesgold.com or call 855-823-GOLD. So grateful to have Mark Brnovich on. You served as the 26th Attorney General for the great state of Arizona, and you are a true patriot. And I have so many questions for you, Mark.
Always great to talk to you, Sara. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have you on. I wanted to talk to you first about Trump's legal battles, because this is, I mean, the topic of conversation from the moment I turn on the radio, whether I'm listening to Fox Business, whether I'm over on the Patriot Channel, listening to Sean Hannity or anybody else. It's all about, President Trump. And I was listening to Newt Gingrich earlier today, and he was discussing the fact that, this is in the only time in American history where we have seen one person in particular, a president of these United States, being targeted by a system that has been weaponized to target political opponents. And I've been saying that from the very beginning when we first started covering the Russia hoax, and that it is so extreme that it is making Americans very edgy and very nervous about the direction our nation is taking. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I do. And let me just, for some of the listeners that don't know my background, look, before I was elected Attorney General,
right.
I was never in politics. I was a prosecutor. I was a federal prosecutor. I was a state prosecutor. I was a judge advocate general in the Army. So, I understand the great responsibilities that come with being a prosecutor. And I used to always tell the people that work for me, whenever we'd have meetings or new lawyers get hired, that when you're the government, your job is not to see how many years or how many sentences you can get against somebody. Your job is not to see how much, you don't count success in terms of what the financial settlements are. When you're the government, the only measure of success is, has justice been done? And no prosecutor anywhere, whether at the federal or state level, should ever just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And so I think a lot of people fundamentally realize that, look, in third world countries, what ends up happening is you end up prosecuting and arresting your political opponents, and then you seize power, and then you end up giving, all the benefits to your friends and family. And especially someone, and I know you have the same background, Sara, that, families had to live through communism. This is very eerily similar to what happens in communist and totalitarian regimes where they try to squelch all political opposition. Heck, even Stalin had show trials, right? And so right. I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent. One of the things that I try to tell folks is, look, I understand and appreciate that Donald Trump is very divisive to some people, but we in the United States settle our differences two ways. One is by exercising our First Amendment rights, and two is by through the ballot box. And now what you are seeing is, left-wing radical prosecutors essentially trying to tip the scales in the elections using the criminal justice system. And I think that's a very dangerous precedent. And one thing I would say to all, the people that are like moderates or left of center or people that worry about Donald Trump is, look, the political process usually sorts this out, or does sort it out. We've seen that. And as much as the hue and cry is about Trump and whether he's this or that or the other thing, the bottom line is that between the courts, him, everybody else, the system worked last time in the sense that we had this, peaceful transition of power. And I know some people were not happy with the results. Putting all of that aside, focusing on the prosecution, I would just ask all of those folks to consider what I call the 3 T's of prosecution. You look at the timing, the treatment, and the type of case that's being brought. And I think anybody who's intellectually honest, you look at what's going on in New York, for example, you have facts that are allegedly, years old that maybe are past the statute of limitations, novel legal theories that have been untested, untried. And then you look at the timing of this. Why now? Especially when there was a presidential race on. And so I think that a lot of folks, whether they're left, right, or in the middle, should appreciate that this is a really dangerous precedent when you try to use the criminal justice system to settle political scores.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about it every time I go back, and I remember being in Central America and talking to politicians in Guatemala, in El Salvador, and how the courts are always used, not just were, but are always used now as this weapon against political opponents. And they're saying, well, what's the difference? I mean, America is falling right into this corruption trap as well. So foreign leaders are looking at our nation and saying, what the heck is going on here? You're just as corrupted as other nations that you point the finger at, and we're supposed to sit back and take lessons from you. I mean, that's a pretty hard and harsh lesson for us, right? As Americans who say, you know, our nation is the beacon of light. It's the shining hope on a hill for the rest of the world. Well, maybe not so much anymore, is what they're saying.
Yeah, the rule of law is all about consistency and certainty in the application of the law. And we always say that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your position is, you know, everyone has to be held to the same standards. I think the problem is that when you have untested novel legal theories that seem very politically motivated, I think there's an extra burden on the prosecution to show that they have an overwhelming amount of evidence, and that, you know, they've got, you know, they aren't just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think that even in the, let's call it the documents.
They actually said it publicly, Mark. Remember coming out, even Fannie Willis made statements that she was coming after Trump. They were looking for a crime. Alvin Bragg was doing the same thing. Now, you know, Trump has been basically gagged. The judge gagged him from speaking, so he doesn't even have the ability to speak freely right now as a presidential candidate. I mean, these are, very in your face actions.
Yeah, and they're unprecedented. And this is the thing, is that I was saying, even about let's call it the document case prosecution. Look, people aren't stupid in this country. And they sit there and they say to themselves, okay, well, let's assume, you know, all the facts the prosecution has said about the documents, whether Trump could declassify them or not. But people sit there and they say, well, wait a minute, Joe Biden, other people have done the same thing, maybe even worse, and they didn't get prosecuted. So then the federal prosecutors say, oh, well, that's because, you know, there's no reasonable likelihood of conviction because whatever the reasons, binal senility, whatever. But then you flip
that's
it around.
So crazy. They're saying he can be the president of the United States, yet he's too senile. And he's too, you know, people will feel too sorry for him if he's charged in a court of law for probably much worse, I believe, much worse than what President Trump could have ever done. Because in my opinion, President Trump, he can declassify. He's the end. He is the, you know, the commander in chief. But Biden was probably selling that while he was in the Senate.
Yeah, well,
that's just my.
Yeah, well, and my point is that generally speaking, prosecutors, there's a thing called the rule of lenity. And when it comes to criminal prosecutions, you don't throw stuff against the wall. You give essentially the benefit of the doubt on close cases to the individual. And I'm saying that they did that in Biden's case. Now, once again, it's embarrassing as an American to think that, well, he's too senile and too confused to be prosecuted. But the point is they gave him the benefit of the doubt. So some people say,
but he's our president. So how can he be our president? So how come they're not using the 25th on him? Or will they?
That is a great argument. My point being is that you either follow the rules consistently, that you don't throw stuff against the wall. But then the flip side of it is that, okay, well, if you're going to be like hard asses when it comes to prosecuting former government officials, then why did Hillary Clinton? Because, you know, essentially the federal prosecutors are saying, well, it's different because Trump obstructed justice. Well, wait a minute. Hillary Clinton literally had subpoenas and deleted thousands of emails and stored them improperly. Like, people have gone to prison for less than that. And so
she bleach bit. Wait, let's talk about that, because she bleached, she hammered, she shredded. She had Cheryl Mills, who was a witness, basically sitting in with the FBI. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing. You have a witness representing you as your lawyer in an FBI meeting. All the 302 somehow just disappeared. They did it on July 4th holiday weekend. So it was like, oh, we're having a holiday and then we're going to let her skedaddle out of here. And by the way, Perkins Coie had a special little FBI office inside their building, inside their office. They had a little FBI desk sitting right there. Who ever heard of that? And they were the same law firm that basically, you know, shuffled out the money so that Hillary Clinton could pay for the Christopher Steele dossier through Fusion GPS. It's like so crazy. Like if I wrote it in a book, I would be a genius, but that would be just like the best story ever. But guess what? It's a true story. It's so insanely true. And we're expected to buy it, just like we're expected to buy the new UFO report, which, by the way, I'm not going to even talk about right now, but you guys all know what I'm talking about. Now they say they don't exist. Yesterday they said they did. This is how the government operates. They just continuously gaslight us, play games with us. I actually think it's making our nation insane. You know, nobody knows what to believe anymore. Do you think President Trump will be victorious on the appeal? Do you think he will?
I think ultimately, yes. I think especially in the federal cases, you know, there's a, you know, the courts historically have been wanting to avoid political or get in the middle of some political dispute. And I think that, you know, once again, prosecutors are held to a higher standard. And because of the unprecedented nature of this, I think the federal cases are on shaky grounds. And I think that any honest I hate to use the word. I got to be careful. I don't want to get more bar complaints. The left keeps filing against me. They're nasty. It's lawfare, but no. But I will just say that I think that if you're intellectually honest, there are all sorts of legal issues with what's going on. For example, in the upcoming case in New York, you know, not only the appearance of a bias, but then you have all these issues related to the statute of limitations and trying to strap a state case onto essentially a federal case. I mean, there's all sorts of issues there that I think the appellate courts are going to end up having to untangle.
But are they just tangling him up? Are they just tangling him up prior to the election? I mean, that's what it feels like.
Yeah, I think this is, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to not only be undergoing, you know, one criminal case, but to have multiple criminal cases. And then you have civil cases that are threatening your livelihood. I mean, it's just crazy to think like how much mental energy and how much stress that takes out of any normal human being. And I don't care who you are. I mean, that impacts you, that affects you. So you're sitting there, you think about the time, the money, the mental energy. And, you know, remember, if you're the left, I'm sure the way they look at this is that, you know, it's almost like a minefield where they only got to be right one time, right? Because these are such serious cases. I mean, you know, you're talking some of these cases could be up to, you know, just one of the felonies could be up to 20 years in prison. And then you look in New York and you start stacking them up. It's like, you know, it's just so fundamentally unfair. And that's what I keep trying to tell my friends.
Do you think this is not just about Trump, though, but this is what they can do to any one of us? I mean, my gosh, it's terrifying to think like I haven't had as an exciting life as President Trump. I certainly don't have as much money as President Trump, but anybody can be dragged into a court system where the government has never ending or the state has never ending pockets. And we do. Our pockets end. We don't have those kind of financial resources that that they're using to target the president.
Yeah, and it's not, remember now, it's not only just targeting him. What the left has done systematically in the last few years is they filed bar complaints, they filed civil lawsuits. And so, and I know like in our office, you know, our last few years, we had the universities file bar complaints against us. We were trying to fight to protect taxpayers. We had, you know, liberal firms file bar complaints against us because of, you know, the Brnovich v. DNC election case. We had the Secretary of State. The flipping current governor filed not only bar complaints, but issued press releases attacking my character. I mean, it really is so dirty and just, you know, it's like one of those things that, you know, when I was brought up, you know, we were always told like, look, you don't mess with someone's livelihood or their spouse. And, you know, I just think like the left now, and it's not just me, like they filed more than 24 bar complaints just this last year against people in my office that work for me. So they're trying to basically set an example saying that if you do anything conservative or you work for a conservative, that we will punish you professionally. And I think that's, once again, these are like, it harkens back to communism, where if you don't toe the party line, your kids don't get to go to university, you don't get the good job, they confiscate your farmland. And it just seems like the left now, and it's like, where's the ACLU? Where are all these groups that used to freaking stand up for the Nazis or whatever? Like, they'll defend them in court, but they won't defend conservatives. And that's how crazy the left and cancel culture has become. And it's very, very dangerous, I think, for this country.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And it's not just what we're seeing in government, but what we are seeing right now across the board in the entertainment industry and corporations across America, what we've seen as far as silencing voices, American voices on social media. I talked about that with Devin Nunes in my latest podcast. But John Oliver now, I mean, you want to talk about someone who's going after you, who's going after conservatives. It's John Oliver. You were contacted actually by John Oliver's team about your work on the death penalty in Arizona. And it looks like they're trying to put together some kind of hit piece about you. Why did you fight for the death penalty in Arizona? And I think I understand why. I believe in it. And why are they so concerned about what happens to serial killers and rapists? I mean, like, why aren't they more concerned about what happened to the victims and the families?
Well, that's exactly the point. And at the end of the day, I've always said that those who commit the ultimate crime deserves the ultimate punishment. And I think society shows how much it values innocent and precious life by saying that those that commit the ultimate crime will end up getting the ultimate punishment. And unfortunately in this country, and this is one of the reasons why we're seeing not only, spikes in crime in New York and other places, is that, if you want to deter people, punishment has to be certain and consistent. And it hasn't been, and that's because the left, even now, again, they're coddling criminals. And so just getting back to the death penalty stuff, I was a little taken aback and shocked. And I think what happened, just so the background, so the all your listeners know, when I was Attorney General, I made a commitment, as a former prosecutor, that we were going to do everything we could to resume executions in Arizona and that make sure that these degenerate killers end up getting the punishment they deserve. And there's people on death row here, Sarah, that have been on death row for 3-4 decades. They've gotten college degrees. They've gotten married. I mean, it's crazy. They go on with their lives. And meanwhile, the victims' families suffer. And so we kept our promise, and we made sure that people that were on death row, we started re-executing people. Now, the left, it makes it very difficult to get the drugs that needed for execution. So what happens is the left, because they coddle criminals and, they don't like the death penalty, they make it very difficult for states to execute people. So then it's difficult to get the drugs, and then they complain about how long it takes, where the drugs are from. And recently you may have seen, like, for example, Alabama used nitrogen to execute someone on death row, and then they're complaining about that now. Now they're trying to make it impossible to get nitrogen. Bottom line is that the John Oliver show reached out. There was a lot of inaccuracies and falsehoods in what they were presenting. And the bottom line is that during my term as AG, 3 degenerate killers who went through the appellate process, both at the state level, the federal level, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, who were on death row for literally their crimes were committed in the 70s and 80s. They ultimately got the punishment they deserve. And I'll be frank with you. I was actually at the execution of the killer of Vicki Lynn, a young girl whose mother, Debbie Carlson, I know very well. And, she sent her daughter to the mailbox. It was the last time she saw her alive. She was abducted and killed by someone that had been convicted twice in California for crimes against children. And anybody that feels sorry for that guy, they have misplaced sympathies. Like I said, he was a degenerate piece of crap, quite frankly. He was a child killer, a child rapist. And I went to his execution, and he died way more peacefully and was treated way better than any of his victims. So, John Oliver, whoever, can kiss my ass, because I think that if you're a degenerate killer, you deserve the ultimate punishment. And I'm never going to apologize for doing everything I can to ensure justice for victims.
I absolutely agree with you. And John Oliver, you can kiss my ass too, because if somebody ever touched my child or a friend of mine or anybody, I would want the same. I would want that vengeance. These people are degenerates, but we have district attorneys across this country. And, and once again, I'm just going to quote from the LA Times, Soros-backed district attorneys all across the nation that are trying to change that are giving the criminals more rights than the actual victims. And right now, I think a really good example of that, they finally just arrested him, but it's just to show you how brazen people are. That TikToker who was telling illegal migrants how to invade American homes and basically invoke squatters' rights. I want to play this clip really quick, and then I want to get your take on it.
Ya que me enteré que existe una ley que dice que si una casa no está habitada, podemos expropiarla. Capichi, muchachos, aquí en United States también se aplica la de invasión de terreno. Y creo que ese será mi próximo negocio. Invadir casas abandonadas.
Invading abandoned houses. These are really bad guys. Like, let me begin by saying that I live in Texas now, but I lived in Alexandria. And one of the ladies that was a good friend of mine, she lived in a neighborhood in Fairfax and she worked for me. She was from Bolivia. She's amazing. And she would tell me, oh my gosh, please, they need to stop allowing the people to come into this country illegally. You don't know what's happening to our neighborhoods. We have MS-13. We have people who are there who are working in military positions in Venezuela and other parts who are extorting us now. So it wasn't just that they're invading American homes, even migrant neighborhoods where people are there legally, not illegally, but legally, they were also extorting them and committing crimes. So it's basically like our Department of Homeland Security, Mark, and our government under the Biden administration is just creating this absolute chaos across our nation by allowing people in, not only, people that are looking, quote unquote, for a better life. They're just letting everybody in with no vetting process, with absolutely nobody to take on that responsibility should something go, and something will, and it already has gone sideways. There's nobody that's going to pay the price for what they are doing except the American people.
Well, let me unwrap some of that. Let me just begin by saying that we are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. And when you break the law, there has to be consequences. And I will tell you, that is not a Mark Brnovich quote. That actually was Barack Obama saying that when the 15 years ago. So look, I mean, there was a time when the left recognized that it wasn't fair to anyone to have unfettered illegal immigration. And when we look at the numbers, let's just say, when you look at the, encounters, and then you add in the gotaways, we're talking about 10 million people since Joe Biden became president. Now, I understand people want a better economic future, but let's just assume that 10% of those, the 10 million people are bad hombres. That means in the last 3 years, we've let in a million criminals and gang members. Now, once again, I'm not saying that's an absolute fact, but I'm just saying the law of averages. And it's probably even higher because, as you know, the gotaways, are predominantly 18 to 35-year-old males wearing camouflage and black and sneaking through the desert. And why would anyone sneak through the desert in Arizona or Texas when you can just walk across? And, the hardest question you're going to get asked is, do you want one king bed or two queens? And so there is this amazing cost that's being paid in human lives, and it's undermining the rule of law. And then the guy that you're showing, the TikToker, to me, this is all something you and I've talked about before. This neo-Marxism, you go back to the Communist Manifesto, no borders, they want no private property. And so it's essentially that kind of socialist, communist notion that, well, what's yours is mine, and we don't want any private property, which once again completely undermines not only our freedoms in this country, but also undermines us economically. And so it's a real danger, and it's a real precedent, because I used to always say, as a prosecutor, that the first and basic right, the reason why people enter the social compact is because they want to be able to live in peace and not have someone come along and kill them or take them stuff. And the George Soros-backed prosecutors have essentially said, well, you can take people's stuff if it's their house or if it's under, $1,000 or $2,000. And what that has done is not only undermined our values, but it's created this a danger in our community where you're starting to see more property crimes. And eventually, if you read if you're a believer in the James Q. Wilson broken windows theory, those little crimes, those property crimes, ultimately will become bigger and bigger crimes that will result in people dying.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to live our lives in this kind of fear, like with Lake and Riley. And I mean, people say, well, but it doesn't mean because they're immigrants, that's the reason they committed the crime. No, but she would more than likely, I believe she would 100% be alive today if he would not have been allowed in this country, if he would have been expelled by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And her parents really have no recourse now for her life. I mean, and we're looking at, the lady that was arrested in New York when she had the standoff with the squatters in her, in her home there, that it's Americans feel as though they are being put last. And yeah. I feel that way. I'm worried about the future of our country. I look at what happened in Venezuela. I see what's happening in Central America. We're watching what's happening across the globe, and we're not in a good position. I mean, if we want to take a macro look at this, our nation is really divided, and there's a lot of fear that our enemies are going to take advantage of that. And you brought up something that is, I think, essential and so important, and it is all of those gotaways. Mark, I mean, is there fear you're talking to people all the time. I know you talk to law enforcement, you talk to people within government. You're hearing a lot of things in Arizona, I would imagine on the state level that I'm not privy to. But there's got to be a huge concern that there is somebody amongst those or groups of sleeper cells that could target this country before the election.
Once again, going back to the facts, we know that a record amount of people on the terror watch list have been apprehended. We've seen a surge in people coming over from, Middle Eastern countries that, generally where the United States is not very favorable. The Biden administration has opened the door to a lot of people that have been unvetted. And the reality is, and I said this even when I was still AG, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So when you talk to And I know you talked to a lot of Border Patrol agents and other people that are involved in the Homeland Security community. You talk to people at DOJ, the FBI, and they will tell you that they're not going to say they use the word scared, but they're like, it's coming. It's coming. If you look at the record number of people coming from, that are on the terror watch list, coming from the Middle East, and then you combine that with all of these people, these gangs that are coming over, as we talked about the gotaways. In Arizona just recently, and this has actually happened in other parts of the country now, there are sophisticated South American gangs that are breaking into houses. And this isn't like your typical, petty burglary where someone breaks the window and comes in. These are people that are disarming alarm systems. They're like, disarming and hacking into security cameras at people's houses. They're very, very sophisticated. These are high-level rip crews, and it's in Arizona now. It's in some other places. But once again, every state is a border state now because of Joe Biden. And it's also why, and I know a lot of people thought it was hyperbole at the time, and I know you and I talked about it, but I was the first official anywhere that said, what's happening right now is an invasion. And it wasn't because I was anti-immigrant or anti-anything. It was because I was pro-protecting our communities. And our communities are less safe now and more dangerous. And you mentioned Ms. Riley. There's people that have paid the cost in blood as a result of Joe Biden's failed policies. And one last thing, can I just add this about these are serious topics when it comes to human beings and loss of lives and people's houses getting burglarized. But I literally this weekend talked to an executive at a major healthcare company here in Arizona. And she was telling me that there are hospitals in Yuma and along the border that what's happening is people are coming over and they're injured. Maybe they break a leg trying to cross the border. They have, some illness. They're being admitted to the hospital because they have to be admitted. And apparently Border Patrol or DHS is like, we'll pay for 3 days healthcare. But they have people staying in the hospital for a month, for 40 days. And they literally are like, hey, you can't do anything to me. And they walk out. And she said they're losing their shorts. And I know places like Yuma is losing tens of millions of dollars on, the cost just in healthcare. So we're seeing even the quality of, I think, of our healthcare may end up going down long-term as a result of this, because hospitals, medical providers are losing money now because they have to treat undocumented, aliens, people that have entered the country illegally. And as a result of that, it's resulting in less and better healthcare for us. And then we're ultimately going to have to pay more because someone's going to have to pay for this. And Joe Biden, this is the whole liberal kind of thing where, somebody else is going to pay for their sins.
When you were talking about the healthcare crisis, I remember when I first started writing about immigration in California, and I was working at the Daily Bulletin. And one of the big stories that I worked on, and I actually spent time in a trauma unit, it was at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center. And I was at Arrowhead Regional as the, trauma victims were being brought in. And it was because the majority of our emergency services and our emergency units throughout San Bernardino County and throughout LA County were starting to shut down because they could not, and I'm talking 20 years ago, it could not sustain itself. The taxpayers could not sustain, and neither could the hospitals, the amount of illegals that were coming in and utilizing the emergency rooms as a regular hospital situation or a doctor's situation. And then everybody had to be flown in to a particular hospital, and it was overburdening that hospital. This is a very dangerous situation for residents because when your trauma units start to shut down, when you can't get an ambulance because you're living in a border community and the ambulances are bringing people in from the border that are wounded and you're having a heart attack and you can't get an ambulance to your house, that's pretty serious.
Yeah, I've joked or I've told some of my friends that there is indeed a man-made crisis, a man-made tidal wave that's overwhelming our country, but it has nothing to do with climate change and everything to do with Joe Biden's border policies, because really he is overwhelming the system on so many different levels. And, once again, sadly, I think in some ways he doesn't even know what he's doing. I think he's confused. But the people that work for him, his staff, they're hardcore leftist, neo-Marxist, and,
they're working for Obama.
Yeah.
They're working for Barack Obama. I just don't see any other, and nobody else is running this but his former staff. This is, and I'm going to go back to what we said earlier before I get to my final question. You brought it up. I brought it up. How is it possible that he cannot, go to trial because he has dementia and he may not be able to, he's not fit to go to trial, but yet he can be the president of the United States of America? That makes absolutely no sense. I think, the Republicans have something there. I wish there was something that the Congress could do to bring that. And I would, for the 25th, but maybe they want him to run. Maybe the Republicans want him to run again because they know he's a surefire loser. So just keep the guy with dementia in there.
Yeah, well, I actually had predicted a year ago that I thought that Joe Biden would not be the nominee in 2024. I still will stand by that because I made the prediction. And the reason why I did is because he clearly is the weakest Democratic candidate.
Right.
People know that he's confused. They've seen inflation go through the roof. Heck, as you know, inflation's so high in this country, last year that even Hunter Biden was jealous how high it was. So you've got that, you've got the borders out of control, you got crime. People have an anxiety, and it's the old Ronald Reagan test. Are you better off than 4 years ago? People aren't. And in most places like Arizona and Georgia and Michigan, so Biden's in trouble. I think the Democrats know that. I think they kind of tried to do a little bit of a coup earlier this year where there was the stories and they tried to push him out. But I think now maybe they think they're stuck with him. But clearly, if Joe Biden is the nominee, he is by far the weakest nominee and the most likely to not only lose the White House, but lose Senate seats and House seats.
If they push him out, could they, and I promise I'm going to let you go after this, but I could keep you here forever. But if they find someone else, who do you think that would be? Who would be your guess? And two, could the Democrats, could they themselves use the 25th to get rid of him?
reversal order. Yes, if you recall, there was Democrats, this is the hypocrisy of the left, they were actually calling on Republicans or the cabinet, right, to use the 25th Amendment to get rid of Donald Trump at one point. So they were using the same argument. And now the people raise that the 25th Amendment, which clearly is designed for cases when someone's mentally or physically incapacitated. Now they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. We can't bring that up. And they were the ones pushing that just a few years ago. As far as the replacement, look, I mean, and I'm not saying he's my cup of tea, but look, people like Gavin Newsom are glib. I mean, he was willing to go on Sean's show and do that debate. I mean, he's leaned into his left-wing bona fides. I mean, California is, I don't know if we can use the word shithole. It's a podcast, but California has become a mess. I've talked to people that, and I haven't been, if you look at what's happening in LA and San Francisco, I mean, there's like I say, there's maps or apps where they show where the feces at. One of my friends was just in San Francisco a month ago, and he said his fiance was scared to death because some person deranged on drugs started pounding on their car, and they actually ended up not stopping at any more red lights. And I had another friend that was recently in the Bay Area, and he was told to don't lock your car because people are going to break into it, so you don't want them to any damage to the vehicle. I mean, who can live like that, right? And so I think that all that aside, for a lot of people in America, they think of California as the Golden State. They still remember the movies from the 60s and, whatever, and, Big Wednesday and, Endless Summer. And so they think of California that way. And, Gavin Newsom is a, good-looking, articulate guy. He's got a lot of money. And so I think that he would change the dynamics of the race. But at the same time, because the left is so obsessed with identity politics, I just don't think you can replace, Joe Biden with, a white, rich, liberal male, for lack of a better expression. But
it's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's like the Dems have nowhere to go. I'm still trying to figure out, even though the polls are swinging in the direction of Republicans, we see that more and more, both Latinos and Blacks and everybody just kind of saying, whoa, we've had enough of this Biden administration. But in all reality, I'm still trying to figure out where like the 30-something% of people who absolutely love Biden, how they even what is justifying their love for him. And I pray, and I'm concerned, but I hope that America is still the nation, and I believe it is, that my husband fought for, that you have served, that my father fought for, a nation where it stands on principles, Mark, a nation where we can get back to those roots that our founding fathers established, and that we could get to the ballot box and have a straight, honest, fair election. And by the way, I really do believe we should just go back to paper ballots. People are doing it all across the globe, westernized nations, and put an end to all of this mess, just get to the ballot box, and whoever becomes president, peaceful transition of power. Although I really hope that is President Trump. But I'm really worried that we're not there anymore. I'm worried, and I think a lot of people are worried, and I'll give you the last 30 seconds. I think we're just very worried that things aren't the way they used to be.
Yeah, every generation always says, oh, this is the most critical election, but it really is, because what we are seeing is that, are we going to continue on a path of unfettered illegal immigration into this country and the growing bureaucracy in the deep state, the swamp in DC, the erosion of individual liberty, the erosion of private property rights in this country? Or can we at least have a pause and even make sure that we get judges that are appointed that believe in the rule of law, which is something that I think that President Trump never got enough credit for, that what he did with the judiciary, which was so important, long lasting. But I think at the end of the day, it's really, really difficult. But, when you start talking about why does this person vote this way? Why does this person vote that way? But I'm guessing the Biden administration, look, Trump can be very divisive. President Trump can be very divisive. And I'm sure the Biden administration has polling that people are worried, the opposite of that they're thinking that somehow, President Trump's a threat to democracy. And, that's why they run all this stuff about, this tyranny and everything else. And I think that's why they keep, bringing that stuff out, because I think what they're banking on, the left is banking on, is that, Joe may have the staff running the show and he may be dazed and confused, but he's, not going to be, a dictator. And that's really what the left is trying to do. They're trying to scare people to say Trump is so dangerous that you got to vote for him. And I think ultimately, people are smart enough where they're going to see through that. And that's why I still think that someone like Gavin Newsom would be a much better candidate than Joe Biden. But I don't think the Democrats will allow that to happen. And, if it ends up being, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I think President Trump's going to win the swing states.
I do too. From your mouth to God's ears. I hope so. I hope so. Thank you so much, Mark, for being a part of the show. I know I kept you a lot longer than I had intended, and I'm glad that you were able to make the time, and I can't wait to get you back on. Hey, folks, thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. Thank you, Mark, for being a part of this show today. Hope you come back on. Please make sure you're subscribed to the Sara Carter Show on your favorite podcast app. It helps us keep the show free, and it really gives us a boost in our algorithm. If you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, go ahead, take a look over there. We got Devin Nunes on. We've got Mark Brnovich. We've got all kinds of great guests. You can go there, give us a like and a follow as well. Thank you so much, because that does make a difference. And follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state, Texas.